Welcome to our panel discussion, Movements for Black Lives Across the Generations and Genders. Today's forum is sponsored by Union Presbyterian Seminary's Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership. And Union Presbyterian Seminary's new Master of Arts in Public Theology degree program. Are you called to be a Christian leader in the public square? Know someone considering theological education? Contact our admissions directors at admissions@upsem.edu. Our panelists are Reverend Dr. Anne Marie Mingo, Assistant Professor of African American Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Penn State University. Chris Burton, a Union alum and Director of Equity and Inclusion at the Stony Brook School. Reverend Quincy James Reinhardt, Associate Campus Minister at Morehouse College, was unable to join us tonight. Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley, a member of the Board of Directors for Interfaith Power and Light. Our host and moderator is Dr. Rodney Sadler, Associate Professor of Bible and Director of the Seminary's Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation. Dr. Sadler, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's wonderful to be with you all today, and I'd like to welcome you all to another episode of Just Talk, Talk Just, as we wrestle with the issues of the civil rights movement versus what's going on today with Black Lives Matter. This is an important topic, to be sure. I would be remiss if I did not start out today, however, doing two things. First thing I'd like to do is just offer a word of prayer as we begin this conversation. We are at an important transition point in the history of our nation, and we should take some time to acknowledge that. And the second thing I'd like to do is just have a moment of silence as we commemorated yesterday the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Much of his work forms the basis of the work that we're going to talk about tonight. So we'll have a brief moment of silence after we pray. Let us pray. Holy One, it is once again that we come before you with thanksgiving in our hearts. We are grateful today that you have brought us thus far on the way through many dangers, toils, and snares. Lord, as we stand here today, we are at the threshold of a pivotal inauguration, the transition in power. We want to ask that it would be peaceful, that the notion of nonviolence would maintain itself, and that concepts like love would govern the way that we think, that we truly live into the best parts of this experiment that we call democracy in our nation. Lord, as we gather before you right now, we are grateful for so many witnesses who have gone before. We want to particularly call out today the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as one who gave his life that we might have change, as he viewed a promised land from a mountaintop. It is in the name of your Son and our Savior, Jesus the Christ, that we pray today. Amen. The civil rights movement is arguably one of the most successful movements in the 20th century. Spanning more than a decade, it was able to shift policy in the U.S. at the national level, including among its successes, the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and other policies that work towards fair housing, work towards affirmative action. But more than that, the movement changed the hearts and minds of the people of our country. For African Americans, it shifted the dialogue from one of fear of the police, fear of incarceration, fear of what could happen if we stood up to claim our rights, to one of confidence, as Dr. King and the host of others that were with him stood up to show that these were no things that they needed to fear. It also shifted the feelings of white Americans who came to see that the cause of the civil rights movement was moral, consistent with our national ethos and ideals, and it was the best way that we could foster change in America. As a result of this movement, subsequent movements have been following the example for the better part of half of a century. More than anything else, this movement defined how we view nonviolent direct action as a strategy for raising the level of tension until negotiations could lead to change. More recently, the Black Lives Matter movement has come on the scene. In response to the killings of African American men and women, this movement has taken center stage in contemporary efforts to foster justice. Now I'm pleased to say it is the largest movement in the history of this world, particularly in the aftermath of the George Floyd uprisings in the US last summer. This movement has now manifestations that span the globe. These two African-American based movements are examples of what people can do at grassroots levels to foster change in their material circumstances. They've truly defined their ages and impacted efforts to foster the value of Black lives, indeed all lives in this world. Still, there is much about each of these movements that is distinct. The civil rights movement, though replete with female leaders like Rosa Parks and Fannie Lou Hamer and Coretta Scott King and countless others, was largely thought to be a Black male-led movement, as most of the recognized leaders were Black male clergymen. Being a clergy-led movement, issues like LGBTQ rights, though evident at the time, were not explicitly at the center of this work. Further, this movement, though replete with leaders of different perspectives, was beholden to the strategies of nonviolence, born in Gandhi's movement, translated through James Lawson's work, and then employed by Dr. King and his many disciples, and even transformed other movements. For example, John Lewis, who we celebrate, was a member of SNCC who gravitated towards the King ideal of nonviolence. By contrast, the Black Lives Matter movement has founders and leaders who are female, often part of the LGBTQIA community, and has a different understanding of a strategy than the civil rights movement did. Their understanding of the moral high ground, notions of the way that love should work, are interpreted differently in light of the extended struggle for change. Things have not happened as they should have, so we've got to change the way that we argue for rights. In some respects, it is a different movement fit for a different age. As we come together tonight, I'm going to ask our various panelists a few questions just to get us started. And after we start our questions, we invite you all to add questions in the chat if you have any questions, and we will make sure that we try to get them before our panelists. I want to start off tonight, though, with a question for our senior figure tonight. The Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley is a disciple of Martin Luther King Jr.'s. He stood with him, marched with him, stood beside him on many occasions. Dr. Durley, I'd like to just start by asking you to tell me a little bit about what do you think Dr. King would say were he here at this moment now? Had his movement lived up to what we thought it was supposed to be? I want to start with that one. And then I want to ask you, what do you think he might say about the Black Lives Matter movement as it's unfolded?
Fairly clearly, I want to thank the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and all my panelists. Tonight is a very special night, and I think that as we look back, I remember in 1960 when John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, and all of us started there in Nashville. And all of the kinds of efforts that we talked about around voting and around get out to vote and working together was very important. And then I come 60 years later to the Black Lives Movement and what it has meant. I think Dr. King would be very, very impressed with what's going on now because he was always an optimist. He always believed that the strength of the movement was in young people. And we see that occurring right now. He was always one that devoted himself to the diversity of men and of women. And later on, we'll find out the role that women played when we were back there in 1959 and 1960, which was very important. So I think as we look at the movement now, there's always been one movement on top of another movement, all the way from Harriet Tubman through Frederick Douglass through other leaders all the way through. So right now, the civil rights movement and what we were involved with, the Black Lives Movement is based upon that. Had these other movements not occurred, I don't know if it would have the same kind of impetus that it has right now. So we see it as a very positive sign. I think Dr. King would see it as a positive sign. I know when I speak with Andy and all of us, we say, this is the best time that we can work in this movement. And so I think that he would be extremely positive. The Montgomery boycott movement, the March on Washington, all of these were simply foundations, and no movement can be as strong as its foundation. So I think this is a very positive time. I think he would look for it. The key is to be optimistic and begin to work with the diversity. In those days, it was very difficult because it was a different time, and diversity was very complex for so many stereotypes that we had to work through. But I think it's a completely different time now, and I think it's very, very essential that we begin to recognize how important it is with the plethora of individuals' ideologies. We were strapped into a narrow kind of effort at that time. Even some of our own folks fought us at that time. I think the openness now is very paramount, what we have to do as a movement. And Black Lives Matter is at the heart of that. And the women that are leading that and governing that have played such an essential role, but it's based upon the foundation all the way through what Bayard Rustin and others worked through getting us to this point.
Well, I just want to say thank you for that. And you sound like a very proud papa of the Black Lives Matter movement. That these are your children that have gone forward and continue to do good work. I just want to say, before I say anything else, I know that you've been through some significant losses in the last few weeks, particularly your most beloved wife. And I just want to say thank you for being here in spite of all that you're going through. A true testament to not only your own character, but your faith in this, your faith in God, and your belief that this work is significant. So thank you, sir, for all that you do.
Let me say one thing. When we had the uprising after the George Floyd here in the city, we met at the gathering spot, and Bernice King, and we met with the Young Black Matters, Lives Matter, and they asked a very key question, which I think is important. We want to do exactly like you all did in the 60s. They can't do that. This is not the 60s. This is their movement, and they have a new kind of energy, a new kind of diversity. And this is what Stacey was saying to them. Stacey Abrams is in her time right now. That was that era, but it's always built upon the previous kinds of initiatives. We built on the initiatives before us, and I think Black Lives Matter is building on ours, and the young ones that are coming on now are going to be so exciting. This is our moment in time.
Amen. Thank you so much for that. And I think you're 100% right. This is our moment in time. How do we claim this space? Dr. Mingo, I want to come to you and ask you a question. We just heard from Dr. Durley the significance of Stacey Abrams in this moment, a Black female leader who has transformed this nation. If I can think about all that's going on in Georgia right now, the Black female leadership that took place with multiple names I could lay out, but almost all of them are female names. It's significant. I want to ask you about the role of Black women from the civil rights movement to the Black Lives Matter movement. Has the role of women in these movements changed, or is it this more explicit in this moment?
So along with Reverend Dr. Durley, I'd like to thank those who've invited us to be a part of this tonight. So thank you to the organizers and the sponsors, especially the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership. I love the question. In many ways, I believe that the roles of Black women have not so much shifted from the civil rights movement to this current movement for Black lives, but the visibility and commitment to learn from the erasures of the past have led many to not allow their strategic leadership and the courageous resistance of Black women to be eclipsed by men in the media. right? So we were able to see this with Alicia Garza and Patrisse Cullors and Opal Tometi, who we know as the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, especially as that movement began to expand into the more umbrella organization of the movement for Black lives, with so many other organizations within that. We watched those women and others begin to claim space and narrate their own work, as the media was often drawn to the male mouthpieces because that's what they were accustomed to. But our understanding of the long sort of standing Black women strategists who were creating space within communities for the types of changes that they desired has really become more clear over time, but the women have always been there. Short answer to say, has it shifted much? Have the roles actually shifted? I don't really think so. But our understanding and their visibility is what has been shifting, and that's really important. So just as a couple of examples, if we look at educator and political organizer Septima Clark and the citizenship schools that she and Esau Jenkins created in Johns Island, South Carolina back in 1954, and then took on to the Highlander Folk School, that laid the foundation for grassroots political awareness and preparedness that created powerful voting blocks within the South. Clark was focused on creative and practical education for both young and older people as a way for political, economic, and social power. That was her way of bringing those things together. That was then later picked up by the Freedom Schools, along with SNCC, led by Dorothy Cotton and others. So we look at what she did in 1954 in preparing people for what happens in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act, almost a decade-long struggle. Parallel with Stacey Abrams, who we now see and we're celebrating, but she had been doing that work with Fair Fight and other organizations for a decade. We look at Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright with Black Voters Matter. They founded that in 2016, even though many of us are just sort of coming into awareness of their efforts in 2020 and 21. Those grassroots workers, those grassroots women were doing the work that went largely unrecognized and uncelebrated until almost a decade later of them working in the trenches to give more political awareness, preparedness, so that we can create strong voting blocks in the South. One example. Another, Mary Fair Burks and Joanne Gibson Robinson, had been leading the Women's Political Council in Montgomery since 1946. Fast forward to December of 1955, again, almost a decade later, they were able to leverage the strategic plans that they had been doing, the data that they had been collecting, the meetings that they had already been having with local white leaders to continue to put pressure on those systems to get the desired change that they were looking for, especially for young people. And so we can also look at women like Amelia Boynton Robinson, who along with her husband were doing the hard and dangerous work of education and voter registration in Selma, so much so that SNCC at one point was afraid to send some of their workers there. Then we think now of the work of Alicia Garza and others with the Black Futures Lab, whose goal is to expand on the work of these previous generations by, as they would say, building Black political power and changing the way that power operates locally, statewide, and nationally. And then finally, I'll lift up an example of the way that generational partnerships have been working across these times and across these movements. I think especially of the work of Gwendolyn Zahara Simmons, who was a student at Spelman before she got involved in the civil rights movement and became one of the project leaders down in the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964. When she goes down there, they are looking for a place to stay because they were in Laurel, a place that was so dangerous that they didn't even want to send any of the white students for Freedom Summer because it was too dangerous for them. She goes trying to find a place to stay. They had been commuting about a 30-mile distance because there was no one who was willing to open up their homes. They went to the churches. They wouldn't open up the doors. They went to some of the other men. They wouldn't open up the doors. But she made her way to the steps of Mrs. Alberta Spinks, who had been an active member of the NAACP. And I just want to read a quick quote from that I've got in my upcoming book as Ms. Zahara Simmons describes this meeting. And she talks about Laurel and she talks about this interchange. She said,
say the name of your book first.
I can't speak on it yet until the editor gives the final okay. I would love to drop it, but I can't quite yet. But I can give you this quote. So she says, Laurel didn't have an infrastructure when we got there. And little by little, we started meeting people. We had to sleep in Hattiesburg, the next town over, 30 miles to the south, and go up in the day looking for people to get involved in Freedom Summer. Finally, I had the name of an NAACP member named Eberta Spinks. And I went and knocked on her door. When she opened it, I was stumbling. This is again Gwendolyn Zahara Simmons describing this. When she opened it, I was stumbling, trying to figure out, how do you ask somebody, can I live with you and put you in danger of being killed and your house being burned and everything? How do you ask somebody who's never laid eyes on you to do that before? So I was sort of stumbling around trying to figure out what to say. And she looks at me because I had on blue jeans. And she says, sort of parenthetically, we had a sort of uniform. She had on a blue jean jacket and her blue jeans. And she, Miss Eberta Speaks, says, are you one of those freedom riders? And I didn't know if it was good or bad. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, come in. I've been waiting for you all my life. And at that point, Miss Eberta Spinks was 50. So when we think about these generational exchanges, when we think about the fact that, as Reverend Durley was mentioning, going and having this conversation with those who are currently activists within the movement for Black lives, we've always had that. We may not know it, and that's a different question, right? That's a different challenge. Why is it that people would prefer to have us only know about a couple of the individuals and only sort of truncated aspect of even their lives? Why? Because we've got greater power when we understand that women have always been at the fore, that women have always been the strategists, that women have always done this grassroots work that a Stacey Abrams did for 10 years before we see these results. I can give you example after example of 10 years worth of work before you get a Martin Luther King getting some of the accolades for these things happening and more. So just wanted to park it there. Also, Miss Eberta Spinks was the one who said to Gwendolyn and the other students that were there, y'all just go ahead and sleep. Because Miss Eberta Spinks would sit up at night with a rifle across her lap to make sure that they were safe so that they could continue to do that justice work that they were doing. We don't talk about those aspects. And yet it's that type of exchange and those types of roles that haven't necessarily been celebrated that led to the victories and successes of the civil rights movement. And those similar types of roles are leading to victories and successes that we see now in this movement for Black lives.
Thank you so much. That was such a wonderful and rich answer that as you listen to the answer, you learned a history that you may not have known too. So I'm so appreciative, Dr. Mingo, of what you just said and the way that you have enlightened us. These women have always been at the forefront. Women have always been at the heart of these movements. It's just that we're now beginning to notice a role that has often been obscured through our history. Thank you so much. Soon to be, Dr. Chris Burton. I want to come to you right now and just ask you a question about the fact you're involved here in the civil rights, the Black Lives Matter movement today. To what extent do you think about the Black Lives Matter movement today as a direct offshoot of the civil rights movement? To where in this movement are you beholden to what that movement did? And where do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement needs to depart from the strategies of old, let's say?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, first, I want to say thank you to Union Presbyterian Seminary, and I'm just so honored to be here, not only with the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation, but with the center that has the namesake of my mentor, who's now in the great cloud of witnesses, the late, great Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon. Like just being here and just being able to speak about something that's so important to me, and knowing that I would not be as equipped to speak about it had I not spent the time that I was blessed to spend with Dr. Cannon. So I just want to thank you all, and of course thank Reverend Dr. Durley and Dr. Mingo. So I'm grateful to be here with you all. I think history is critical if we're going to succeed in the future, and it's sometimes the temptation and the seduction to do this sort of work ahistorically. I I'm blessed to work with young people at the Stony Brook School, a Christian boarding school in Long Island, in Stony Brook, New York, where we have students who are just getting off the ground their first year of having what we call student unions, like affinity groups on campus. And we talk about it through the lens of why we have these groups, so that we can ensure that all students at the school, including students not only from marginalized groups and not only from people of color. Sometimes we use these expressions to try to dance around who we're really talking about, who, the great Howard Thurman would call the disinherited of the earth, the least of these in Jesus's terms, talking about Black people in the United States, right? And so we have these organizations to make sure that all of our students not only can survive throughout the matriculation process at the Stony Brook School, but thrive there and be able to go into the world, or whether they're going after they're going into college, but not only just in terms of college preparatory nature of it, but also understanding how are they going to use their time and space. And a conversation that we often have between my students and I is understanding that there are roots to what we're doing. There's a temptation, especially if you're a young person, to think like no one's ever done this before. I remember having a wonderful exchange with one of my students who went so far to say, we're the activist generation. They were really excited about what we're doing. Like, we're the activist generation. I said, well, slow down. Like, you got to understand what John Lewis did. You got to understand what Diane Nash did. Like, I know you're excited about what you're doing and it feels new, but what we're doing is building off of what's been done for generation and generation before. So even going back before, I'm a proud alpha, so I always look at Dr. King as an example, but going before King and looking at what A. Philip Randolph did, and looking at what Marcus Garvey did, and obviously going back to Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and all these ancestors who paved the way for us to be able to do the work and push it as far down the proverbial field as we can. So it's important for us to be students of history, and really, as much as we're engaging with the time that we're in now, taking on that Sankofa mentality of understanding that we are looking forward, yes, but we're also able to move forward because of gleaning from the past and gleaning from the historic lessons, both the successes and the failures, and being able to have a healthy criticism, not getting caught up in too much celebration without critique, but also being able to understand that we couldn't have the advances and have the conversation that we're having in this time and space without those previous victories. Because I think another seduction, if you will, is the pessimism. I think it's important to be hopeful. And I know that sometimes optimism sounds naive to people, but I don't think that we would, as a people, have gotten as far as we have if there wasn't optimism, if there wasn't a hope and a belief that, this station in life that we have currently is not the best that we can do, isn't what is predestined by God or by caste or some sort of external force, that we have to hope beyond our current condition. And so I think part of the departing from the strategies is really understanding that there's a need for us to work together. I think sometimes in the past, there was too much of a temptation to sort of pick your corner and lock into it. So if I'm in the NAACP, I'm working with other folks in NAACP, I'm not too worried about what the Urban League is doing. If I'm in Garveyite, I don't care about what Du Bois is doing. If I'm following Booker T. Washington, I don't care about what Du Bois is doing either. And we're all going to gang up on Garvey. Like, I don't think that that's helpful for us. And even as much as I talk about being a proud alpha, us understanding that all of these different organizations, we're getting ready to celebrate Kamala Harris, who's a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. And I think it's important for us all to understand all of these different organizations with their proud legacies, histories, and the members that they have can work together, both within and without, and understand how we can build something together. So even if you never went to college, no chance of going to college, there's a legacy that we can all build upon together because of what all of our people have collectively survived and gone through. So not only am I excited to talk about intergenerational discourse, but I think the main thing we need to depart from is being so territorial with our piece of the pie, because it ain't that much that we're talking about in the first place. So let's make sure we put it all together so we can make a lot from it.
Thank you so much for your reflections there, and rich and deep. And I want to say I'm going to go off script for a second because I recognize the significance of the moment. I just heard you as an alpha talk about your sister who's going to be sworn in as the Vice President of the United States tomorrow, an AKA woman graduated from Howard University, HU, who will be taking the center stage as the Vice President of the United States of America, first female, first African-American, first Indian-American woman to sit in this role. This is significant. Tomorrow, also, we will have seated not just John Ossoff, a young Jewish man, disciple of John Lewis as senator, but the Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, a Georgia native like King, who comes out of Ebenezer, the Baptist church that the King family made famous in Georgia. This is a significant moment in time. I probably just, before we open up conversation, I want to get some response to this moment from each of you. Dr. Durley, I want to start with you. What are you feeling as we are about to move in tomorrow, as we come out of the last 4 years that we've come out of, and as we move forward? What is your word for this moment?
Several years ago, I never thought in 2007, when we were out in Iowa with a young light-skinned brother from Chicago with big ears, that he would become president. And as they were doing the caucusing, we were walking in the snow and we said, is this really happening? And there was a sense of optimism, but disbelief. And that's when we came up with the phrase, we can believe. Do you believe? And we started believing, and then people started believing. And I think even now, as we fought with John Ossoff down here in Georgia and Raphael Warnock, and people began to come together here in the deep South, it's a matter of belief, that we believe that it could happen. We understood that the opposition would be high, but remember that we've got to understand one thing: the civil rights movement, at the base of it, we had an ethical and a moral mandate, an ethical and a moral mandate that was spiritually founded, that we were willing to do two things. We were willing to sacrifice and risk. All too often now, people will say, I'll come to the movement after I leave my meeting. We've got to sacrifice and risk. So we were willing to give it all. In this movement that's going on now with Raphael and John and everyone behind, people were willing to sacrifice and risk at any cost. But the strength is that it became diverse. Young people and white people and Jews all came together to begin to understand this is larger than the individual. There were people that said, well, can Raphael do this and can Raphael do that? And we had to make it clear, this is not about Raphael Warnock. This is not about John Ossoff. This is about 2 Senate seats that will make it very important. So when Biden and Kamala got in office, that they would have the kind of background to make a difference. So we had to put personal issues aside. It wasn't about a Black Baptist preacher and a Georgia Jewish boy. It was about Senate seats. And once we could get that together, we could understand. So tomorrow and the subsequent time in the swearing in, I am so excited. After all 60 years of seeing the making, the coming together, and something that Dr. Domingo said, and it's very critical. The women played such an integral part. In fact, their role, if you talk to Octavia Vivian or to Evelyn or to Juanita Abernathy or to even Coretta, their role was even stronger than some of us who were out there in the front, because they were there protecting children with the threat of a bomb being, and still we'd come back and they had to say, and pump us up to go back out there, particularly those in the real hardcore center of it. They had to say that and then look to the left and right. So they had a mental, they had a psychological, they had a spiritual, and they had the ability to keep going and not even show the kinds of fear that many times those on the front line had. So I think it's critical now that kind of effort is giving me some kind of excitement as we move toward tomorrow, the swearing in. So the strength has always been the background people that you really never saw, but at that time, it was a completely different time. But we all understood that the women were the heart of that. And CT, and I did the eulogy for CT Vivian, and I had to make that clear to everybody at the eulogy. And when we talked that was the effort. So now as we're moving in, and women are taking such a strong major part, to me, it is an evolution based upon a foundation that has been emerging for some time. Because we even say, the church is always the black church. But I tell you what, the black church would have died years ago, even though Jesus is alive, had it not been for the black woman, because they were at the heart of the black. We can be up there talking about, oh, how I love Jesus, but those women were in there teaching children and pumping us up. So we see that now, and it's converging now in a very, very appropriate moment. And I think we're going to see some very exciting, meaningful legislative issues around many topics: health, climate change, all of that. But again, we must understand that it started on the foundation of the African American vote right here in Georgia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murray. Thank you so much for your words and your perspective over the length of time. Dr. Mingo, what are your thoughts?
I'm excited about it. I really am. This is a time that so many have hoped for, that we are actually living in. And so hope it's a powerful tool that I'm glad that we've not let go of. That's what has kept so many of us. I talked much earlier when we were, before this fully got started, about the resilience of Black people. This is a part of the results of the resilience, right? This is a part of the result of the hope. This is also a part of the results of what I call our theomoral imagination, which is where we're able to see and imagine something that doesn't come to us from humanity, but really comes to us from God, of an existence that's not quite there yet. It's a liminal type of thing that we go through, that we're now about to live into, we're about to live out. And so that's really exciting. To be able to witness this on tomorrow. I'm certainly praying for them and their families and their safety and everyone else around them, because our nation is still really, really sick with the cancer of racism and white supremacy and all of these other things. And so we've got to do the work to make sure that what they are able to do is the work that moves us all forward. And so, as Dr. Durley was noting, this wasn't about necessarily, as we think beyond the inauguration and the election of our president-elect and vice president-elect, but also to those two Senate seats, as your other part of the question was asking. This wasn't about those two as individuals. This is about the strategy of creating the amount of power that's going to be necessary so that the policies that are come up with can actually be executed. But then the next part comes on us. And this is where, from my experience, we often begin to fall short. We do all of this work, again, decades worth of work to get the right to vote, decades worth of work to change a state from one color to another color. And then we say, great, high five, we've got it. And we pull back. This is not the time to let our foot off the gas. If anything, we've got to shift into a different gear and keep moving forward. This is also not the time to simply sit in neutral. I was taught by one of my professors that a car in neutral can be pushed either way, pick a side and then move forward, right? So this is the time for us to continue to do the work that we've had to do to get to this point, to bring even more to the party, right? To bring even more to the work of justice, to bring even more to the political strategies, and to hold those accountable, right? That accountability means that we still have to show up at the meetings. We still have to show up at the sessions. And this is not just at the national level. This is showing up at the school board meeting. This is showing up at the city council. This is showing up and having conversations with the mayor and the governor, right? All of those things allow us to not just sit in this moment of history and pause there, but to use this as another springboard to take us even farther along the way. As it was being mentioned earlier about trying to navigate for pieces of pie, I actually generally say, I ain't worried about a slice of pie. There's a whole bakery. Let's get the pie, let's get the cake, let's get the custard, let's get all of the pieces, right? We shouldn't just be strategizing, trying to get a little piece of pie. Let's work it all, right? It takes different pieces and different strategies. So I'm excited for this piece. I'm going to celebrate with that piece of cake and then keep doing the work so that we can get even more and bring justice and equality and love and all of those other good things to everybody. And who we have at those tables really helps us to do that. Right. And so we're already seeing that in the way that this new administration is setting up their cabinet. We're seeing that who sits in those sort of positions of power and begins to allow people to come to the table helps us to start setting different menus. We can move out of just cake. We can move out of just pie and get some other nutrients, some collard greens and some cornbread and some, fish or something. All right. So that I'm excited. All that to say, I'm excited about what this moment brings, but I'm even more determined to allow this to not be a stopping point, but just another jump off point.
Thank you. I love it. That's going to preach at some point in time. Results of resilience. I love that. The results of resilience. And I love this point that you said today. And it's something that I think we need to make sure we hear over and over again. Just because we got this victory now doesn't mean we take our foot off the gas. Doesn't mean that we stop coming out to vote. Doesn't mean that we stop pushing for what it is we'd like to see. It is our responsibility as citizens in the midst of a democracy to constantly work towards the kind of country we want to see. And if we don't push past an election, if we don't push past the midterms, if we don't keep pushing and writing policy, Dr. Durley knows about writing. It's not just that you work for a bill, you help write that bill so that it looks like what you want when you argue for something like green energy. So we got to keep working and keep being part of this if we truly want to live up to what it means to be part of a democracy. Thank you for that reminder. Dr. Burton.
I think there are two things on my mind in regards to tomorrow's historic inauguration. One, I had a chance to look at the preparations and all of the flags that are put in place where in a normal time, both a COVID-free time and a threat of insurrection-free time, if you would, people would be standing. And those flags, I think I read a report that said 200,000 flags are on that mall, representing what's now close to 400,000 people who've been taken from us through COVID and this global pandemic in the United States, close to 400,000. And so that makes me hopeful for a season of lament in terms of us really being able to look at where we are. And it's in particular, not so much pandemic related, but also talking about this mainstreaming of domestic terrorism and mainstreaming of white supremacy, hoping for a season that will lead us into confession as a nation, like understanding that we can't try to distance ourselves from it and say like, oh, this isn't who we are, but acknowledging how much what we've seen, the ugliness of it all is a part of our nation's legacy and history and how we need to confess that. And I'm hopeful that we have leadership in place now who will be willing to go there in terms of being a lamentful nation, like teaching us or rather modeling for us what it looks like to have a healthy process as a nation to grieve collectively and to lament collectively. And then on the other aspect of it, when I think about this inauguration, I think about Frederick Douglass's words of agitate, agitate, agitate. Now, I've said that I'm excited for this administration to come into office so I can hold them accountable. Celebrating and pretending that tomorrow is a finish line is a bad idea, right? Because people are only going to get accomplished what they're being pushed to do. So it's our responsibility as participants in a healthy democracy to make sure that our elected officials, we got you there. Now we need you to get us where we all need to be collectively. And so when I think about our responsibility and that civic duty and understanding that oftentimes people get excited for national elections and then the fervor dies down, but understanding how we need to continue to remain in conversation, whether it be with our Congress people or even in local politics, and understanding how we have agency beyond our expectations if we work together collectively. So using this inauguration, yes, as a brief moment to celebrate, but also to reflect and hopefully to move forward in a way that goes beyond just the surface co-opted use of the word healing, but is actually something that's thorough and comprehensive, that the only sort of healing that happens through repentance.
I want to thank you for that response. And I think I heard something in what you said that sounded something like tomorrow might be a commencement, but it's not a conclusion. This is where we begin to do the work. It's not the end of it. And we've got to continue to press on in that way. Thank you. Thank you for those reflections.
I love that. Can I just say, Chris, thank you for starting there at the space of lament, and thinking about what President-elect Biden is doing today, of having that memorial service, right? The first national memorial of the 400,000 lives, family members who have been taken from this virus, is one of those steps. So I'm hopeful with you that this will be a part of that process. So thank you for bringing that up.
No problem at all. Yeah.
And I wanted to add something, from the church point of view, which is the strength of so many of us, when we've had a great worship service, Rodney, we've had a great worship service. People sang and they jumped pews and they spoke in tongues and they threw tambourine and they felt great. And then they did the benediction. But the benediction ought to be the beginning. We pumped up, and that's what our history shows, that when we were down under the brush arbor trees and we prayed and we hollered, we were ready to go out and fight. I hope that now in 2021, now we got the first Black senator from Georgia. We've got the control of the Senate with Kamala's vote. Is that we don't say, and I think this is what Dr. Mingo was leading to. Let's sit back. No, I always tell people, this is the benediction is really the beginning. Thank you for getting me pumped up so that I can go out now. And therein lies the real strength of what we're going to do. And oftentimes we tend to say, well, we did it. Look what we did. And we walk around with our chest out. And we've got to understand that, let me use the term, the adversary is walking around seeking whom he or she may devour. So consequently, we've got to understand that they've already started working on 2020 election, 2018 election. So we cannot just stop in 2021. It's laying the foundation. And someone said it earlier, holding accountability. We tend to say we rest on our laurels. We cannot rest on our laurels right now. This is the most critical, historic election of our time that none of us thought we would really see. But I think that the strength of this is that when we all and somebody said about all the silence, it's not about whether you're alpha or a kappa or omega or the bootleg, are you black, are you white, are you female? It's about now those that want equality and justice and democracy. Now we all come together as one major force. And that's what Biden and this administration is going to need, because it won't, the McConnells and all, they're going to be, the Cruzes, they're going to be there. But it's that 70 million out there. That's the group we have to really now put in check. That 70 million, that's why you see Washington crowded like this. That's the group that we really got to understand. These people believe, see, if they were faking, I could deal with it. Donald Trump believed everything that he said. The man is sick, but he believed everything that he said. And it's tough to deal with a sick person like that. And those people that are right now, they believe that you can deal with somebody that, just kind of mealy mouth. So we got to understand that now with that belief system so entrenched, how do we have a moral and ethical obligation to stand the ground and bring justice for all.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. You've led me to where I want to go with this next question, which is the Black Lives Matter movement, the civil rights movement. They have at their core this notion of nonviolent resistance, nonviolent direct action. In part, that led for part of the Kingian movement to work towards something called beloved community. And beloved community was a phenomenon which occurred when those who had starkly different opinions, views, blacks and whites in a divided America were able to sit together and find a sense of brother and sisterhood, siblinghood that transcended their differences. As we sit here today, what is the role of fostering beloved community in the healing of this nation. How does this play a role in where we are today?
Those of us who were in SNCC, we didn't get along with the people at SCLC. We thought they were, when we looked at, we didn't call him Whitney Young, we called him Whitey Young, because they were sitting up there, the big six. And so there's always been that diversity, but that diversity is what makes us strong. So as we move into this era now, I think it's a matter of between the intergenerational, doing something real strange and foolish, maybe like communicating. And communicating is based upon three primary principles. Do we understand each other? Do we respect each other? And can we trust each other? Where there's no trust, respect, no understanding, there's no communication. And I think as we move into this phase, and that's young and old, how we've got to understand, where are you coming from? Where are we coming from? How do we develop that trust so we can move from a common goal? But some people say it was all a big kumbaya meeting in civil rights. No, it was not a kumbaya meeting. Hosea had his role. Andy had his role. Martin was a conciliatory. And we've got to understand, and right now, we all have different perspectives of how we're going to move ahead. But it's when we come together and alleviate, because God did not give us a power of fear, but of a sound mind to move ahead in this. And I think that that's where the real strength of what we do now. Otherwise, this will disperse, and one group will get their little piece of the pie, and they'll be up there begging Biden for this and begging Kamala for this, and it'll be disjointed. But I think when we can come together and understand that we have a common purpose and a common goal of justice and equality for all, that's when the real strength, and it's all mitigated as something somebody said, as Dr. King said, and that love that casts us out all darkness. We've got to be very careful right now. This is a critical point. Otherwise, we're going so many different points because we think this is our time to get my little, what did you say, piece of the yogurt or a piece of the pie or a piece of the cake. It's not about my little piece. It's about how do we all come together and dine as one family.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that response. I hear beloved community as justice for all, manifest as finding a way to find justice for all in the midst of this. Dr. Mingo, Dr. Burton?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, especially in the way that you've sort of reframed it for us in thinking about this as a moment to consider what is the role for this beloved community. And one of the things that it made me think about was what we experienced over the summer after the violent and public murder of George Floyd that was captured by this 17-year-old sister who had the wherewithal to stand there despite the pain, despite fear, despite anything else, and hold her phone steady enough so that we could all see this police officer with his knee on George Floyd's neck, taking his last breath. That brought people together in a way that we had not seen in quite a while. Now, many will say, this is the first time we've had Black folks and white folks together marching. That's not true. That's not true at all. But it was a time that we were able to see it during a time that we were experiencing it in a way that began to galvanize different populations that had not been moved by the other thousands of deaths, Black deaths, right? So taking advantage of this opportunity to, for me, Black Lives Matter is a moral statement, right? So it's a theological statement, and it's a moral statement around the humanity of life, right? That we are recognizing it and seeing it, bringing others into that fold, where they may not lift up the banner of beloved community, but they are now able to lift up the banner of Black Lives Matter, which is centered around that love, right? Which is centered around that humanity. I believe that's an aspect of what we're doing to work towards a beloved community. as I think, though, about what Dr. Durley was noting, in that so many of the different organizations during the time of the civil rights movement had different different ways forward, right? I've also heard of Dr. King being called the Lord by those who were like, he's always thinking that he knows what he's doing and saying, right? There are all of these types of things that were happening, and yet they found a way to move forward. It didn't always have to be on the exact same thing. Right? As somebody is working on voter rights registration, others are working on the strategies in the courts. Others are working on the strategies in other spaces. We can't get distracted in thinking that we need to do one singular task when there's so much injustice. We need all of us working towards all of those things. One of the other things that ends up happening, though, as a part of what the media sort of, in my view, blew up into more, which is when some of the white student workers were quote unquote expelled out of SNCC. Many of them, as I've gone to many of the reunions, were told, you don't need to be here, go back and talk to your people. Go get your people, which is what I say now too. So for those who have come in to many of the movements that have already been happening as a result of what they saw with Breonna Taylor, as a result of what they saw with Ahmaud Arbery, as a result of what they saw, with George Floyd. Now go get your people, because it was your people who had the knee on the neck. Go get your people, because it's your people who are the judges who are letting folks go. Go get your people, because it's your people who are doing that. That's a part of this work too. And so we can't get caught up in thinking everybody needs to be doing the work the same way. The work is the work, and the work is massive. So we all have to find our ways to do that. And one of the things that I love about this current moment within the movement for Black Lives is that they are not looking for one singular leader. They are not a leaderless movement, as people would have thought. They call themselves leaderful. They have so many leaders who can take on all of these different tasks. They don't need one singular person who can be taken out and the movement dies. And so we've got to take that on and accept that, and not expect it to look the same as it might have done in previous iterations.
Amen. Thank you so much. Chris?
Yeah, I'd like to add onto what Doc was just saying just now, because I think it makes me think of two things. One, that Pauline understanding of when he's talking not about the beloved community in the context that we're using it, but talking about the body of Christ, that some are going to be the elbow, somebody's going to be the knee, somebody's going to be the nostril, and that they all have important parts and roles. And I think about that understanding of being leaderful and what it means, one, for that leader, if we were using the archaic models, how leaders are often isolated, assassinated, sort of like cut off or vilified in one form or another. And if it's a leaderful thing, to have colleagues and peers and really being able to say, okay, I can depend on this person, that we're all working together. And something that I really am hopeful for with regards to the beloved community is because there are so many different kinds of folks working together in this moment. I'm hopeful that we will understand that when we look at Dr. King's example, when we look at the civil rights movement, that although King was a masterful politician, although he was a masterful philosopher, he was also a theologian. And I think it's important for the movement to not only be try to accomplish the goals that we're trying to accomplish through secular means only. I think it's an opportunity. It's high time for the church to involve itself, not in a sense of oh, thank you for getting the ball down the field, Black Lives Matter, we've got it from here, but having the humility to really come alongside and to work with, or having the humility to learn from the successful tactics that have been employed in the last 6 or 7 years thus far. And I think it's really important to have that sense of spiritual guidance back into the movement. If we're fighting the evils that we're fighting, like the white supremacy that we're fighting is truly an evil beyond physical means. This is a spiritual evil. It's a deep core sickness in our nation's body. If we're going to understand that as such, to fight it through secular means only will exhaust and kill people. And we have to have that sense of how do we not in the sense of beating people over the head with spirituality, beating people over the head with the gospel, but how do we model that love? You know, scripture talks about they will know we are Christians by our love. How do we model that love? By pursuing justice. How do we encourage, we're talking about go back to your people. How do we encourage Christians to understand that doing this work of justice isn't some sort of like political breach of contract, that you were supposed to remain apolitical if you're following Christ? How do we show folks that although Jesus is the Christ, that saying Jesus is Lord is a political statement, that it's really hard to do this work of taking up your cross apolitically, that it's really never been done before, and to do it as such is really a watering down of the gospel. So when I think about the beloved community, I see a need for the church to really enhance its role in a way of coming alongside, not sequestering itself off, but really being in the public square with other brothers and sisters in the beloved community who are doing the work and really have their skin in the game.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Dr. Gurley?
I was going to say it's very interesting. When we were meeting during the movements here in Atlanta around down at the CNN Center, and then we all, Black Lives Matter, myself, Bernice, and some of us came together. And the word, are you spiritual or are you religious? I'm not religious. I don't want any religious. I want to be spirituality. And you can understand, because some of the stuff that we do in our churches, 32 hours of announcements is crazy. And some of the things, so people don't really be bothered with that. But there's a spiritual element that is so important. And here's what I really saw. We were getting ready to meet and everybody was up. Well, what are we going to do? Are we going to march down? Let's call Keisha down here. Let's get the police. I said, before we do anything, can we just center for a moment? Can we center for a moment and find out and go down into something that's greater than ourselves? I don't know who you call your great deity, but something that centers you, to focus you, so that we can be on one accord about a purpose and a mission, but more important, about an outcome. Because just to go down there and take over a street or tear up, that means nothing. What is our goal? So let's focus. And it goes back to, Chris, I think what you said. How do you focus that? And that was at the heart of the alleviation. I think Dr. Mingo alluded to it, that God did not give us a power of fear. We were scared half the time. How do you implement? Let me wake up a word. Spiritual humor. We had to use spiritual humor to go. And many times words would say, I don't know if I'm going to come back tonight. Well, I'm going to come back. Well, you going to be ahead of me? Yeah, I'll be ahead of you. But there was an ethical, moral, spiritual, and the cause was larger than what we thought. The two words, sacrifice and risk. If someone comes up to me and says, I'd like to come to the meeting, but I got a fraternity meeting, you don't come at all. And I think therein lies that sacrifice that's so critical during this era, but it has to be, and I'll say, a spiritual foundation, because we all reach a point of hope.
It looks like we've lost Dr. Gurley for a second. I'm sure he'll be right back in a moment. Want to switch gears a little bit, and I hope he doesn't miss the beginning of this call. Dr. Gurley, are you back?
Am I back?
You're back.
Yeah. It's that point where we don't know what to do. Andy Young always said this. Here's what Andy said. When we went to Birmingham or Selma, wherever it is, we really did not have a master plan, but we had a master planner. We didn't have a master plan, and we knew. And the master planner said, you all got to be there because this is right. This is justice. Well, what's the plan? I'm not sure. Let's follow the master planner. Even in '65, the Selma crossing, it was not planned when John got out on her knee. But look what it did. It changed the whole movement. There was a plan when she got on the bus that day. She was just a tailor, but she got on that. But the master planner had it. So sometimes you don't have to have all of the answers, but you have to have a goal. And therein lies where with the Black Lives Matter, they have the energy, they have social media, they have the power, and they have the people. But what is the goal? That we can hold the people in power accountable when we take it down? therein lies the real strength. With the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Movement, I see that they intertwine. And those of us who were in the civil rights movement, it's not our time. Our time is over. Our time is over. They've got all of the social media stuff. I'm catching this stand on StreamYard tonight. And but they've got all of that to move. We had a Gestetner machine and a typewriter, and we would give, if we got 85 people out, we had a movement. But now it's 10,000. So how do you combine? But it's the synergism that's going to take us into this next phase of legislative change in our government. And we got a powerful, integrated young base that's challenging their own parents in their homes now. And like Dr. Mingo said, I said 30 years ago, Black folks, we ain't never discriminate until white folks say segregation is over, it won't be over. And I think they're being checked. That is in their court once again. We've put it in their court. Now, what are you going to do now?
Preach.
Excuse me.
No. We're about to take up a love walk again.
It's in their court. In your court. You got the Senate. You got to vote. What are you going to do now? And we got Kamala sitting up there from Howard University, my alma mater. Yeah.
Amen. Fellow Black.
All of the HBCU love. I love it. All of the HBCU love.
Exactly. You had a wonderful point in that regard. I want to start with gears. This question actually came from, in part from one of the members of the audience, who was wondering about the way that LGBTQIA+ issues are evident in the Black Lives Matter movement. I want to expand that question a little bit and say, so even in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s, how did the work for the rights of LGBTQIA+ people, how was it evident in that initial movement? We know that Bayard Rustin was part of this larger. Was it ever a role there for LGBTQIA+ rights? And how is it manifest today in the current movement? I want to start with you, Dr. Gurley, and then, okay.
We were a victim and a party to the same Black folks that thought Tarzan could speak to apes. We thought Tarzan could control Africa. And so we used a little, are you a sissy? Are you a gay? Are you a punk? And we used all of, so we had to really grow to understand. And from the theological, were they born this way? Were they not born this way? So we were a part of the brainwashing to understand that Bayard Rustin, when we got to Washington and what he was just a chain smoke. But a lot of people say, man, he a chain smoking sissy and all of this. But then you begin to grow as we all grow to the next level to begin to understand, like for the last, as you know, for the last 8 years, I've been the AIDS speaker on December 1 for 8 years now here in Georgia. But I had to grow to that myself because I came up, I was a ball player. And if somebody, oh man, he ain't nothing but a punk, or she's a this, or she's a gay, and all of those stereotypes, and we were there. And we had to grow even in our own community. But again, many of the women, they were hiding, and many of the guys that they couldn't flame, they were hiding, and they couldn't come out of the closet. So they were going through a lot of challenges. And now we've got to grow to allow a person to be who God created them to be. But we had to grow to that. So they were in the movement, but they had to sublimate all of their activities away from those about in front, because we would say, no, you can't get up on the front, because we need some men, or we need some strong sisters up here. And we were a victim of that. We were part of that kind of oppression that was a part of it. We had to grow to where we are now.
Thank you for that.
I certainly wish that Reverend Reinhardt was able to join us tonight. I know that this is right in his wheelhouse of his research and of many of his other areas of work. So I certainly do think of a Bayard Rustin, who had been a part of movements well prior to what we know as a traditional civil rights movement. And that's why his strategy and expertise were drawn upon, so that he could help do some of that work. And in many ways, not to say in the same, but in similar ways that we do in the Black church, we will take your genius, we will take your gifts, and then not allow you to be front and center as the actual leader. And that was a big problem during the movement. That's one of the things that I see differently now during the civil rights movement, that I see differently now. And I'm thankful, one, for the evolution of those who had been previous leaders, as Dr. Durley is noting, that they had to come to this wisdom and knowledge to move beyond the things that they had been taught, knowing that it was errant at this point, and be open to saying, you know what, we were wrong with this. In this moment in movement, we see younger people who are leading us and saying, I don't care what you think, this is what I'm about to do. And this is why I'm about to do it. Again, centered in love, centered in the humanity of all. That's why, for me, the Black Lives Matter movement is a theological movement. Whether or not you want to place it into certain particular camps, that's not for me to do, because they are drawing from a variety of different spiritual sources to be able to do this work. And they are saying, I'm going to lead as my whole self. I'm not going to put parts of me in closets or in bags or in anything else. I'm bringing all of my wisdom. I'm bringing all of my genius to this work, and you need all of it to be able to keep moving forward. And so I'm glad that we've been able to learn from the limitations of the past so that we can live in the fullness of this moment and not have people sort of bifurcating themselves to try to fit and help us reach our goals, even when we don't want to necessarily place them in the front to celebrate them. Bayard Rustin is certainly one of those examples, but there are many others, right? So even when we look at like a Pauli Murray and others who struggled with the way that they were able to present themselves because of the limitations of our humanity. In that time period, I'm thankful that the leaders today don't have to do that. Even if they are being questioned and asked, they are standing in their truth and leading with their full selves. And we're all the more better because of that, because they're bringing their full selves to this work.
Yeah, I think about how limited our work would be if we were to remove the contributions of the queer community to our liberation. You know, like it would be very difficult to articulate this in a way that's been articulated by James Baldwin without his contributions. And I think for people who are still, because I don't want to wear rose-colored glasses and say like, oh, now this younger generation, they don't care about all that stuff. I don't want to paint that, because I don't think that's quite an accurate portrayal either. But what I do think is critical is, one, it is not just for you to extend the same oppression that you're fighting against to another person. And I think really helping all people, but especially the young people who were able to teach and mentor to understand that, to extend that sort of oppression makes you a hypocrite in your work. And furthermore, having someone express themselves isn't conditioned upon your fully understanding what's going on with them. I think that it's incumbent upon us to extend hospitality, to say, like, even if I don't fully understand or agree or wherever you're struggling with within yourself in terms of working towards acceptance, I think it's really critical that you extend that hospitality that is really incumbent upon you if you are truly a loving person, which I do believe that when we struggle for the liberation of Black people, it is a movement grounded in faith and love. So I think with that, hospitality has to be there as well.
Amen. Thank you for that. Dr. Durley?
Gay and lesbian and queer community.
Mm-hmm.
We had to fight. Remember the Black church? We were very oppressive to women. We were very oppressive to women and had to go through that. I mean, I remember when I ordained a woman in 1984, a man told me I better learn how to play checkers because I was going to play checkers with the devil the rest of my life throughout eternity. And then to move in that, so fighting those barriers for women and equality, because Christ broke down the middle wall of particularly male and female and Greek and all that, but it was still very real. So then finally they said, okay, well, let's go beyond the Sunday school teacher and all that to really ordaining women to be in the leadership of the church. And then all of a sudden, now, you mean we got to go beyond women and go to this whole new thing? Oh, wait a minute. What do we do? And I think that now that level, and it's still a strong, the women role is accepted. And now this new with the gay and lesbian, behind the closed doors, it's still a real discussion, but I think it's beginning to open up, because it's only when we can get all of those opinions that we all go, we all can, all ships will begin to rise. And I think that that's where we are, and particularly in the African American church. I think it's opening up, because before, all the little jokes about, well, I don't want a choir director to do this, I don't want to, but I think there are more progressive men and women who are coming out of the seminaries. I think that they're much more open. I think it's going to make what we do now much stronger as we move into 2021, 22, 23, because we get the strength of all of that diversity coming in for our mutual goals.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm hearing that over the years, we have changed as Black people, as Black movement. We've recognized that the natural evolution of the civil rights movement was for everyone's rights to be respected and protected. I really appreciate that. I want to lift up a concern I saw a few years ago. Actively involved in North Carolina with the Moral Mondays movements back in the day. Moral Monday movement is perhaps now the Poor People's Campaign is perhaps the lineal descendant from the civil rights movement manifest today. I remember a march of HKONJ march a few years ago, and in the middle of the march there was controversy between leaders of the Moral Monday march and then leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement over the way that things should work in strategy. I remember also a conversation that was had at the Children's Defense Fund's Haley Farm between these young leaders and sort of people from the older generation. And this was led by Reverend Nelson and Mother Joyce Johnson, who were saying, we've got to find ways of working together. They've been a great witness for civil rights movement with this new group of Black Lives Matter citizens. Tell me a little bit about the generational divide. We've talked about the positive things that have gone back and forth, but tell me a little bit about the generational tensions that have also bubbled up, and how have these two movements been able to forge new camaraderie despite those generational tensions?
Chris, I'd love for you to hop in on this first, and then I certainly have some thoughts.
Oh, for sure. I think the tension often is, and I mentioned it earlier, that sense of the passion, the energy is with the youth. And sometimes that leads to an ahistoric approach to things. And you sort of feel like no one has ever breached this before. You believe that, there are no lessons to glean from. And so you don't even know that you're making mistakes, that there's wisdom that could have helped you avoid those mistakes. And I think on the other end of that with our elders, there's a seduction from nostalgia, that like, you all aren't doing it the way we did it. And I've seen that. Like, I'm just 33 and I already see myself doing that with my 16-year-olds. I'm like, no, y'all are doing this wrong, and so I think somewhere between that nostalgia and that sense of discovery, there has to be the communication that happens. We think about the ways by and large throughout society, because of technological advances, even though we have the prolific use of social media, we know that a lot of social capital has been severely reduced. People aren't spending the time with their grandparents or with elders in the way they used to be. They're not in organizations and associations in the way that they used to be across the board. So there isn't that opportunity, even when we're talking about church, to sort of learn from the mother of the church or learn from the elder that's been going to that church for 60 plus years. Like, there isn't as many opportunities for us to be in those same spaces. We're in our echo chambers, and even that becomes a generational ghetto, for lack of a better expression of it. And I think that when we have that, it really creates just a limited understanding of what the opportunities and what the work ahead of us is, because there's still so much work for our elders to do in terms of like taking the wisdom and imparting that to the young people. And the young people, even though they have the energy and enthusiasm, having the opportunity to have the space for a healthy patience, not the kind of patience that, we see in so many churches where you could be almost 40 and you're still like one of the youth of the church, not that kind of patience, but the sort of patience that allows you to say, let me sit in this holy incubation period and learn and glean from those who've come before me. And now I'm ready to go out and do this even more effectively. So that intergenerational discourse is something that's really key. Like I love that you mentioned Haley Farm, Dr. Sadler, because I think about the many summers I spent as a Freedom School servant leader intern, the opportunities to work with the great Marion Wright Edelman and other leaders with Children's Defense Fund, and how that was really forging an understanding of the need for intergenerational discourse. You had college students getting ready to sit down and have lunch with someone like Bob Moses. Like I actually got to meet Senator Warnock at that time at the Haley Farm, because there's so much of an emphasis on like everyone being able to sit together, regardless of title. You're able to sit and break bread with both Reverend Otis Moss III and Reverend Otis Moss Jr. You get to sit and break bread with folks. So I think having spaces like that where we can all learn from one another, because no one's really putting themselves up ahead of anyone else, is critical if we're all going to thrive and not become just too territorial over the knowledge or lack of knowledge we have.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a wonderful bridge between those generations. Dr. Mingo.
Yeah, I love this question because I saw a comment from one of the audience members. I think it was during the time when Dr. Durley was speaking, around saying, hey, I think that the groups need to work together, meaning those who have been a part of the previous movements and those who may be a part of the current movements. And in many ways, I already see that happening. So often, if we only allow our understanding of movements to be given to us through either an old black and white static image or a current meme or a curated soundbite, then we miss the depth and the richness of what's actually happening on the ground. There is and has been for a number of years a council of elders that has been working hand in hand with those who are doing more of the current movement operations, those that were doing the Occupy movement. There was a council of elders who had been a part of the movements during the civil rights movement that would go and sit and work with them on strategy, that would sit and work with them on the ways of staying safe and other things. Just because the media didn't show it to us and the people who were doing it were wise enough to not publicize it, doesn't mean it's not happening, right? So there are already intergenerational alliances to give the wisdom of the past to meet with the wisdom and the energy of the present so that we can all move forward. I see it. I know the person that I was mentioning in the very beginning, Gwendolyn Zahara Simmons, she's a part of this. She's a part of the Council of Elders, and many others who you all may know. So once again, just because we don't see it in the media doesn't mean it's not happening. And many of the persons who are in the forefront of leadership today, they've got very close relationships with persons who we would consider elders, right? As Dr. Durley was explaining, going back and forth with those who are in the movement there in Atlanta. From city to city, I can name grassroots activists that I've been working with or a part of, and I know their relationship with elders, and that's where they're getting their information. That's where they're getting their wisdom. They also read. Hello, somebody. They pick up books and read. Many of them know and understand the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, and previous movements to that better than some of us who think that we know it because we quote unquote lived through it. They've been doing the deep study, and that's why they're able to then say, I actually want to do and model this after Ella Baker because I like her participatory democracy movement. I understand that I want to do something that is not hierarchical because we know what that's going to lead to. They've learned. They are going back. They are learning. They are talking to those who are there. And I will also just conclude and say, there are many of our elders that are on the street fighting right along with them, marching right along with them, going to jail right along with them today, right? In addition to those who are funding. Right? We're finding our way into this movement however we can. And I really don't think that there is as much of a division for those who are really active as those who are on the outside might be led to believe, because the media will shape that narrative for us, and it's not to the benefit of those who are oppressed.
Amen.
It's to the benefit of the oppressor. And so we have to question and challenge that when we're being fed certain messages.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I love that way that you tied that up there, that often it's the media that presents an idea that divides us, i.e. that we are divided by class, divided by age, divided by which movement we're part of, but often we're right there standing next to each other, working beside each other, working toward the same common end. Dr. Durla?
He talked about the Haley Farm. I'll never get when we cut the ribbon on the Haley.
I think he's about to say he was there when they cut the ribbon on Haley Farm.
Yeah, he's got to come back. I need to hear this.
Yeah, I want to hear this story. We can't on that story. We got to make sure we get that story back.
Definitely. We got to get the good stuff.
Absolutely.
And actually, so in case people don't know, while we're waiting for him to come back, in case people don't know, many people don't know that Alex Haley bought a farm in Tennessee, outside of Knoxville, in Clinton, Tennessee, with the money that he made from Roots. And he transformed this farm over a period of years as a great place for people to come and to spend time to write. It was a writing place for him. In the aftermath of his passing, Marian Wright Edelman decided to purchase this to make it a place for a vademecum, a coming together every year, so people could work towards the larger goals of social justice and working on behalf of our children. So Haley Farm has become a central locus in our country for gathering to talk about how do we not only continue to do social justice work, but how do we make sure that this work goes forward to that next generation? Dr. Durla, you were about to tell us a little bit about Haley Farm. I was just trying to fill in the gaps until you got back.
Hey, this is fantastic. Fantastic. We cut the ribbon, and you know who I said as we cut the ribbon and we planted trees, who I learned from was a man named Sam Proctor. Sam and I, we were digging trees and putting trees in as Marian Wright Edelman, and we were all laughing. And what would happen? That was when the farm was just being built, and we were all. And Sam, Sam had a great sense of humor. He said, "Why are you giving me this shovel?" And Mary said, "We're going to plant a tree." He said, "Well, give the shovel to Durley. He's a young man. I was 50 then." And but it's that kind of laughter and that kind of humor that the Haley Farm, as Brother Burton was saying. But again, then we would sit and just listen. Joe Lowry was 99 years old. And I'd sit with Joe. I brought C.T. Vivian from Grady Hospital to his house. He was 95. And he would sit there, and you just sit there, and sometimes they would ramble. Sometimes they would make sense. But every time I could grow, I was a sponge. I was a sponge. I'll never forget when C.T. received the Medal of Honor, sitting in one place with John Lewis, Andrew Young, Joe Lowry, and the two kids. The kids in the group were Jesse Jackson and Gerald Durley. And Joe said, "Go get me some water." I said, "Hey, go get me some water, boy." I was 68 years old then. But we understood that there was a respect among those that were there. And I went, and we were at my church. I went and got the water, and when I brought the water back to Joe Lowry, you know what he said? "Where's my napkin? Where's my napkin?" What he was really saying is respect the pecking order that you can grow. So I had to subjugate, and not that they were telling me, not that they were bossing me, but it was giving me something. So when we pass this on to the next generation, allow the growth so that they can ask the questions that we build upon. But again, before them, that was Benjamin Made before them, or when Otis was there. It was that kind of passing on, and how we integrate that. I've often said, as we in the virtual church now, this virtual stuff, the key that made us strong was a 5-letter word that's key. And we've got to integrate it again between intergeneration. The word is touch. How do I touch you? Not just physically, but with your mind, with your heart, and with your spirit. And if a movement is to have any kind of sustainability, and an intergenerational group has got to go, we've got to understand the power of the touch. Jesus said, "Somebody touch me." Mm-hmm. And if we can do that, who touched me? You might not know, but you've been touched. And how do we integrate that into all of our academia and all of our movements and all of our theological study? The touch. And I'm not talking about just the physical. I'm talking about all of those elements that are the touch. And that's when we can really get, I think, that intergenerational bond, when we can feel free, when I can feel free to say, what were you talking about? How did you do this? Oh, I see. And then they can say, and feel the comfortability. And I talked to them earlier about respect, trust, and understanding. Then we communicate, and then we got that bond that I think is so critical, that intergenerational bond. My time is up. My time is up. I'm a relay runner. I pass the torch on. I look at the two of them on the phone. They've got the light. They got the torch. I've run my race. I'm tired. But the torch has been passed on. And here's the beauty of it. They're going to have to pass the torch on in another 20 years anyway. So all that they can pick, and all I'm doing tonight is speaking what was spoken into me.
Yes.
I'm speaking it into this tonight.
Amen. Well, I want to say
but it's the
thank you to each of you tonight. To each of you for the contributions you made. Dr. Mingo, I am so appreciative of your wisdom, your insight, your brilliance. Thank you for pouring into us. Dr. Burton to-be, I'm so grateful for your thoughtful, reflective answers, for your ability to see the value of history even as you live into this new movement. Dr. Durley, I will always be indebted to you for everything, your wisdom, your insight, and the way that you break down for us all that's gone on in that historic moment, but how you link it to what's going on today. Each of you has really opened up for us this conversation about what's going on and shown us that these are not really necessarily fully two different movements, but different expressions of struggle for Black lives, struggle for human rights, struggle for a different way of understanding that transcends generations. So thank you for this rich conversation this evening. I am grateful for you all for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to the voice, to Mike Frontiero, in order for him to close us out. But just let me say, please join us again for our next conversation on Just Talk Just next month. We are pleased to be able to bring you such brilliant guests as Dr. Mingo, soon to be Dr. Burton, and our dear friend, Dr. Durley. God bless you all.
Thank you, Dr. Sadler, and thank you for watching.